Hello there, my name is Evelyn, and today we're going to be discussing how well executed each license chapter is in Dead by Daylight. I think how well done these chapters are is incredibly important to the game, as with each one of them, many new players join, and if these licenses aren't handled properly, it can be a huge disappointment to those new players. I'll be going in order of release to discuss them, and rating them out of 10. We're going to be doing this based on how faithful their visual adaptations are, how well the perks fit the characters, how the power fits the killer, if there was one, and how faithful and enjoyable the map of the chapter is, also if there was one. Alright, so first up we have Chapter 2, Halloween. This chapter was the beginning of many licensed chapters, and is still incredibly well done. Laurie and Michael's perks are very fitting for who they are, and are still fun to use. Perks like Save the Best for Last, rewarding you for creating a final girl, and Object of Obsession showing Laurie and Michael's link to each other are simply fantastic. Even Soul Survivor, while honestly being one of the most worthless perks in the game, still encompasses the character and role of Laurie Strode. Evil Within is also a fantastic power, and really makes you feel like you are Michael Myers, and survivors going against him feel like his victims in the movies. I have more than 1,000 hours in this game, but seeing a Michael in the distance will still scare me. Visually, Michael is incredibly imposing and looks exactly how you'd want him to, albeit a little dated graphics-wise. Unfortunately though, Behavior did not get the rights to Jamie Lee Curtis's likeness for Laurie. Recently though, with her visual rework, while not exactly like the actress, she does look a little more similar. The only thing that I would say is bad about this chapter is Haddonfield. While visually faithful to the original movie, this map is completely dreadful to play on as killer, with numerous strong loops and mile-long fences. However, while this map is badly designed, it's definitely more of a product of its time. DBD was still brand new, and there wasn't an exact formula to making a good map. This was also the first time Behavior had ever done a licensed map, so it makes sense that they'd want to keep things similar to the source material. Overall, a really good start. While the map brings it down a bit, I don't think it would be fair to give it a low score for that due to the fact that the map is quite old, and it was the first map to be based off of something. I'm giving this chapter an 8 out of 10 for evoking the feeling of Halloween very well. Next, we have Paragraph 1, Left 4 Dead. This license only came with one survivor, that being Bill Overbrecht from, you guessed it, Left 4 Dead. Bill is actually an incredibly fitting character for Dead by Daylight. When I first started playing, I actually thought he was from DVD instead of a licensed character, which just goes to show how well he fits. Visually, he is spot on. Everything about him looks perfect. It's an incredibly neat detail that Bill's cigar never falls out of his mouth. All of his perks are also really fitting for his character as well, like Unbreakable, which shows his willpower, always ready to get back into the fight. While this chapter did not come with a killer or map, I think that's completely fine. A plain old zombie as a killer simply wouldn't have worked. There was some potential for maps, but likely due to licensing this probably didn't happen, since this paragraph was a PC exclusive for a while, and Behavior likely didn't want to have anything that was actually gameplay impacting exclusive to a single platform. To get around the license, Behavior actually released Bill's perks on console as free generic perks, which was a great way to keep things even on both sides. I'm going to give this chapter another 8 out of 10, due to Bill being adapted very well and coming with valuable and fitting perks. Now, we have the chapter that brought the face camping legend himself, Leatherface. As much as I love Bubba and his perks, this chapter is a bit disappointing to be honest. There was so much potential with this license. Sally could have been a survivor, the gas station and Sawyer House could have been fantastic maps, but we only got Leatherface. However, that doesn't take away from how well done Leatherface himself is. His power is quite simple, but fitting for him. Upon release, however, his power, while fitting, was awful. It was quite similar to what he has now, but was much slower. His perks are all actually very true to his character. Barbecue is a fantastic tracking perk, and shows you where other survivors are, which Leatherface would need to track his next meal for his family. Knockout is a bit generic, but it does fit him even if Strong Killer is a very common theme in horror. Franklin's doesn't really make me think of Leatherface, but it is a cute reference to the original movie. Visually, while Bubba looks like he should, his eyes are pitch black, which is an odd choice and makes it harder to identify that he's wearing a mask with human skin. I love Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and while I love having Bubba in DVD, the fact that there's so much lost potential brings this chapter down a bit. However, what this chapter does bring, it does quite nicely, with a fitting and fun power for Leatherface and 2 very useful perks that also fit this campaign. I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. Now, we have my least favorite chapter, Chapter 6, A Nightmare on Elm Street. I've already made a video on this chapter, so I'll keep it brief. Freddy's perks are decent and fit him, but his power feels nothing like Freddy Krueger. Quentin has awful perks, and Springwood is incredibly meh. I enjoy playing Badham, but I know it's a quite disliked map. Not to mention, this chapter is based on the poorly received 2010 remake of Nightmare on Elm Street and didn't get the rights to the actors' likenesses. I'm giving this chapter a 3.5 out of 10. Next up, we have Chapter 7, Saw. This chapter, as an adaptation of the Saw franchise, is very well done. Amanda Young is the most logical killer to represent the franchise, as John Kramer would be much too weak to be able to do things a standard killer does, like picking survivors up or breaking pallets. Her power, while rather weak, is very well designed. Going against her feels like you're trapped in a Saw film, which is perfect. Her perks fit her quite well too. Make Your Choice, Hangman's Trick, and Surveillance all feel fantastic to use and further add to the feeling of Saw. Surveillance also shows the level of control Amanda has over the trial. Detective Tap's perks feel right at home. Tenacity is a nice reference to his death scene and feels fun to use. Detective's Hunch is an amazing perk and feels right at home for him as a detective who would track important things in a case. Stakeout as well rewards you for learning more about the killer by staying within their terror radius. Visually, this chapter is spot on. Amanda looks like she should, and DBD was able to get Danny Glover's likeness for Detective Tap, and he looks spot on too. The Gideon meat plant looks fantastic, and I love the fact that the first movie is referenced by having a dead Adam in the corner of the bathroom. The only downside to this chapter is the map it came with. I actually really like the design of the meat plant. It would be incredibly fun to play on if Behavior didn't choose to have a safe palette every 5 feet. If they changed this would be, in my opinion, the second best licensed chapter, but as it stands, the map is boring and unfair to play on as a killer, and as Survivor, it's just incredibly easy to win. I'm going to give this chapter another 8 out of 10, for evoking the feeling of Saw beautifully in Dead by Daylight. Everything feels just right, except for the map, unfortunately. Now, we have Chapter 11.5, which brought Ash Williams from Ash vs. Evil Dead. This license was handled decently enough, in my opinion. They got Bruce Campbell's likeness, and he actually voiced the character in DVD, which is super cool. There was no map or killer, but similar to the Left 4 Dead chapter, a simple Deadite as a killer wouldn't have been very good. While there's some maps that would have worked, I think the most obvious being Ash's cabin, we already had a map that filled that aesthetic, being Mother's Dwelling. Plus, all the previous paragraph chapters did not come with any maps, which is still the case to this day, so it was likely that Behavior didn't want to break this mold. Flip-Flop and Medal of Man are fun, goofy perks which fit his character, but are almost never actually useful. Flip-Flop is almost only good in certain builds, Medal of Man is incredibly difficult to activate, and Buckle Up is neither fitting or even slightly useful. Because survivors don't have anything that makes themselves unique other than perks, the fact that these perks are quite iffy brings this chapter down a lot. As much as I love Ash, this chapter was terrible gameplay-wise, even if 2 of the perks fit Ash as a character. I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to give this chapter a 4.5 out of 10. Now we have Chapter 12, Ghostface. Oddly enough, this chapter is considered to be an entire chapter, not just a paragraph, despite only coming with the killer. This license is quite unique, as Behavior only got the licenses to the Ghostface mask and not the character from Scream. This means that the Ghostface in Dead by Daylight is created by Behavior. While I love Danny Johnson, this can be rather disappointing when you wanted one of the Ghostface killers from Scream. However, you obviously can't see his face or anything, and there is a classic Ghostface outfit for him that you can buy, so if you want a more Scream-like appearance, that's always an option. He also has very many cool cosmetics. His power is quite similar to Myers, but I think that's fine, due to them both being quite similar in the fact that both stalk their victims to gain information about them. His perks are quite useful, but honestly, only one of them actually feels like the calculated Ghostface killers of Scream, or even Danny himself, that being I'm All Ears. Thrilling Tremors is a great perk, but doesn't reflect Ghostface whatsoever. And Furtive Chase is first off an awful perk, and second off doesn't really reflect Ghostface either. While it does make you have a smaller terror radius, this contributes nothing to stealth, as the survivor you're going against will hear chase music no matter what. I'm going to give this chapter a 6.5 due to the fun and suitable power, but not that fitting of perks, and not being based off of anyone in the Scream franchise. Then, Chapter 13 brought us the Stranger Things license, which in my opinion has been the most popular and important license chapter for DVD. Stranger Things is one of the biggest franchises as of now, under one of the biggest companies as of now, that being Netflix. This chapter made this game much more mainstream than it was before. This chapter is what got my friends into the game, and is what introduced this game to me as well. This chapter was also quite innovative as well, by bringing not just 2, but 3 characters, that being Steve Harrington, Nancy Wheeler, and the Demogorgon. I think that Behavior made a good choice for the survivors, because while Steve and Nancy are not the main characters, they fit much more than the main characters of Stranger Things would. Someone like Eleven wouldn't have worked because of her supernatural abilities, and due to the fact she's a child, she would have been much shorter than all the other survivors. Visually, this chapter did quite well, getting the likenesses of both Steve and Nancy, although Nancy does look a little off. The Demogorgon looks spot on, and the Hawkins laboratory looks just like it did in the show, especially the portal room area. Perks-wise, Behavior did quite a good job. Steve's perks especially feel perfect for his character, as someone who is protective over those he cares about, and is always having the strength to get back into the fight. Inner Strength represents Nancy's, well, inner strength, which is neatly represented by coming out of her literal shell, that being a locker. Demogorgon's perks represent him quite nicely too, with Surge representing his effects on electronics, and Mindbreaker showcasing the effects he has on people. Demo's power is really unique and appropriate for what he is. While I think more could have been done with the Upside Down, his power feels right at home, and feels unique. The only part of the chapter that was a letdown was the design of the map. This seems to be a common issue with behavior. I don't think that there's any licensed map that the community as a whole really likes that much, except for maybe Midwich. Hawkins feels so claustrophobic to play on as a killer. It's impossible to track survivors on as well, and every palette plays very similarly. Hawkins is the only part of the Stranger Things license that I will be happy to see gone in November. I'm going to give this chapter a 7.5 for fitting and fun perks, a good power for demo, and being visually adapted quite well. Now, we have, in my opinion, the best licensed chapter in Dead by Daylight, Chapter 16, Silent Hill. The way this chapter was done was incredibly smart. Due to the fact that there are numerous Silent Hill games, Behavior made the decision to have one aspect of the chapter each come from one of the first 3 games. I love this decision, because this introduces those new to Silent Hill to numerous aspects of the franchise, and makes longtime fans of Silent Hill happy by including an aspect of each of the 3 original games. So, it doesn't matter which one of them is your favorite, as it's represented in some way. Personally, Silent Hill 3 is my favorite, so having Cheryl as a survivor is lovely. Pyramid Head's power had a lot of creative liberty put into it, but it feels right up his alley. The perks for Cheryl and Pyramid Head feel quite fitting as well. Repressed Alliance is such a cool way to represent Cheryl's connection to the other world. Soul Guard is quite cool too. I love that the seal of Metatron was represented in some way. Pyramid Head's perks are very fitting for him as well. The idea of baiting survivors and punishing them works so well for Pyramid Head. However, all of his perks are quite situational or just not very good. Visually, this chapter did quite well. Pyramid Head has his original design, although Cheryl's face looks a little off. Midwich looks gorgeous and is one of the most unsettling maps in the game. Midwich is also quite fun to play on as a survivor or killer. It's quite faithful to the original Silent Hill, but it actually works and was adapted in a way that made it fun for DPD. I'm going to give this chapter a 9 out of 10 because of how well executed pretty much every aspect of this chapter is. The only thing that it really isn't good in my opinion is that Pyramid Head's perks aren't that useful in an actual match. Now we have Chapter 20, Resident Evil. This chapter was honestly kind of disappointing. Not only was the launch incredibly terrible, but numerous aspects of this chapter miss more than hit. Nemesis's power is incredibly underwhelming. His tentacle isn't fitting at all in the way that it functions. Nemesis doesn't slap, Jill, or really anyone with it, nor does interacting with his tentacle appear to infect people in the game. Being infected as well is quite underwhelming too and has literally zero effect other than being vulnerable to Nemesis's tentacle attack. It also feels like they wanted to do what they did with Silent Hill by representing more of the franchise, but this feels half-assed because only RE2 and 3 are represented. Representation from the first or fourth game would have been nice, but we didn't get that. The perks are decent, I suppose. Lethal Pursuer feels good and on par for Nemesis, but I personally don't see how Eruption or Hysteria fit, except maybe for Eruption, as Nemesis seems to enjoy messing with Jill. Speaking of Jill, her perks feel pretty well suited for her. Blast Mine is a neat reference to her experience with bombs, and Counterforce is a nice way to show how she defeats Nemesis. Leon's Flashbang and Bite the Bullet are decent, I suppose, but Rookie's Fury doesn't make me think of Leon at all. Visually, however, I will give Behavior props. Nemesis looks straight out of the RE3 remake, and Leon and Jill look fantastic, especially the map. It looks gorgeous. However, the biggest disappointment of this chapter is the map. Everything about it is awful. It's way too big, impossible to find generators, many killers can't use their power very well in it, and the loops just aren't very fun. I'm going to have to give this chapter a 5 out of 10 for decent perks and a very good visual adaptations, but having many faults and being disappointing in many ways. Now, our most recent chapter, Chapter 21, Hellraiser. This chapter hits the nail on the head, pun intended, in a lot of places. Pinhead's power fits in perfectly and is incredibly fun to use. His perks also fit in beautifully. I love Hex Plaything. It might actually be my favorite perk as of now. It also suits him amazingly, toying with his victim and leading them to pleasure. Visually, this chapter is very well done, too. All of Pinhead's animations are fantastic and unique. I'm pretty sure that Behavior got Doug Bradley's likeness for Pinhead as well. Admittedly, this chapter is a tad disappointing due to the fact that there is no survivor or map, but, like Leatherface, that doesn't mean what was presented isn't fantastic, because it is. I'm going to give this chapter a 7.5 out of 10 for exceeding at what it does, but lacking expanding the chapter with the survivor or map. Alright, that was all for today. How do you feel about the licensed chapters in Dead by Daylight? Feel free to make your own list in the comments. That'll be all, so have a great day!